To give us his perspective on the legislation and clarify the Catholic Church's teaching on marriage, we're joined now by Father Thomas Petri, the president of the Dominican House of Studies. Father, it's so great to have you here with us. Why is the Catholic Church in the U.S. so concerned with a federal right to same-sex marriage? Why does a change in federal statutes, even 7 years after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage, matter to us?
Well, because marriage is a natural institution of a man and a woman, and this is for the sake of raising children, producing and raising children that benefit not only the family, but also benefit society and ultimately for the glory of the church and the glory of God. This new bill, the so-called Respect for Marriage Act, makes it the law of the land that marriage is something that it's not. It attempts to make marriage simply whatever a couple, whether they be a man and a woman or two men and two women, whatever they want it to be. I mean, it's a slippery slope. Why limit it to two at this point? It just further confuses and now makes the law of the land something that is false and will eventually push and attempt to push, I believe, and I think a lot of the bishops believe, will eventually attempt to push religious groups such as the Catholic Church into having to not only tolerate this incorrect, false notion of marriage, but actually to sanction it, an attempt to make us sanction that which is wrong and morally immoral.
Now, Father, religious institutions, they hold all kinds of things in tension, understanding that they live in a secular world that is different from our religious world, our world that it serves to glorify God, and we do hope to transform through evangelization the rest of the world. How can you hold those two in tension, make political judgments about something, and at the same time reaffirm beliefs internally?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be prudential calculus on how to pass policies and how to push, virtue and holiness and the common good as the direction and goal of politics. But the thing is, the eternal truths, the eternal, for instance, the intrinsic dignity of the human person. We can hold in balance the fact that every person should be loved and welcomed as a child of God, but at the same time dispute and, in fact, condemn behaviors that we know, not only by faith, but by reason, are in fact harmful to the dignity of the human person, harmful to the family, harmful to children.
And the Catholic Church does have a history of protecting minorities and fighting bigotry and injustice. How do you separate issues of sexual morality from the love for the individual person? Can you do that?
Well, this new Respect for Marriage Act draws a parallel between interracial marriage and homosexual marriage as if the two are equal. The Catholic Church has always defended the rights of minorities and those who are on the fringes. The difference between interracial marriage and homosexual marriage is precisely the difference of what marriage is intended to be and intended to do, which is to say to reproduce children and to raise children by a mother and a father who are invested in them and committed to their well-being. And gay couples of the same sex, are fundamentally biologically incapable of performing the duties and responsibilities that are inherent in the marital relationship for the sake of the children.
And for those viewers with family members that identify within the LGBTQ community or identify as same-sex attracted, what pastoral advice do you have for them in light of these changes in the law? These are things that can be very hard to hear and very hard to express.
Absolutely, they can be very difficult to hear. But those who are on the path of chastity, the path to Jesus Christ, understand the challenges. I mean, the challenges we all face, regardless of our weaknesses or regardless of what our dispositions are. We all have challenges and sins that we're sort of tempted to. So for those who are sort of caught in the middle between a culture that says everything is fine and the gospel of Jesus Christ, which demands a higher way and a narrow way, I can only say that the grace of God is given to us to actually fulfill what God calls for and to fulfill what he's created us to be. God is not hiding holiness and he's not hiding perfection from us. He's offering it, but we have to not resist. We cannot sort of go the cultural way and presume that that is God's way. And that goes for everything, whether it's sexual morality, whether it's, how we handle finances, how we handle immigration, everything. We have to, as Christians, follow the gospel path, and we are given the grace to do so, even when it's difficult.
And Father, we also then, you have this great background in philosophy and also in political theory, and you understand the law. Does the law always have to reflect the views of our faith? And what do we do when it doesn't?
Well, I mean, it's in a democracy such as ours, in a democratic republic such as ours, it's not always going to reflect our understanding of the common good and how the common good ought to be pursued. That's just sort of the nature of our society and our country. But when it doesn't, when we have a law such as this, as the so-called Respect for Marriage Act, which doesn't in fact respect marriage, what we can do and what we ought to do as Catholics and people of faith is to continue to live our life and to continue to live marriage properly and rightly and with holiness, with the grace of God that we're given in the sacrament of matrimony, to be living examples to the culture of what a true marriage ought to be, a marriage that is fulfilling, even at times a marriage that is difficult.
And we know that since Obergefell, the change in American opinion about marriage, or the non-religious definition of marriage or civil unions, has changed. 70% of Americans believe that same-sex marriage is okay, and that includes Catholics. As a church, what is the call to us? What is the call for you as a pastor, knowing that these are the circumstances that we're in?
Well, the problem, and I think you and I have talked about this before, the problem obviously has been just generations of poor catechesis on the part of priests and theologians and catechists, and helping people to understand, including our Catholics, what marriage is. That's been combined with the fact that Catholics live in the same culture that we're discussing. And so Catholics themselves have not lived the beauty of marriage faithfully. The Catholic divorce rate is just as high as the divorce rate in the culture. And so Catholics haven't imbued and haven't been living the teaching of the faith on marriage and marital sexuality and marital life. And they haven't been given it for generations. I mean, there's just been a radical breakdown in catechesis. Now, thankfully, I think everyone from Pope John Paul II to Pope Francis and the American bishops to priests, be informed and that have been ordained over the last 20, 25 years, recognize that. And so increasingly, thanks be to God, we're seeing more and more catechetical outreach and more resources to get the message out of what the church teaches about marriage, why marriage is beautiful, and why even in those challenging seasons that every married couple has, the grace of God is still living and effective.
Well, we're grateful for your clarity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Montse.